Okay. Well, it looks like we're live on day 2 of Kaiju Masterclass. Welcome to this presentation of Making of Godzilla vs. Biollante. My name is Ed Godziszewski, and this is pretty much part 2 of last year's presentation, which I only got about halfway through. So I would like to first start off with a recap of where we got through last year, first part of the presentation, and then after that we'll continue on through the end, and then hopefully at the end I will like to address some questions from the viewers if we have some time. So let's start up, and just to go over what I covered last year in the first part of this presentation. Basically, this presentation is the offshoot of a commentary track which I did for Echo Bridge back in the fall of 2012. Gosh, it's been 9 years. I can't believe it. I found out that they were going to be releasing Godzilla vs. Biollante on DVD, and I contacted them asking if they would like to have a commentary track, and they accepted. I did it, submitted it about 2 months before the release date, and unfortunately Toho never approved it. So this commentary track, which I did for Echo Bridge, has kind of sat in limbo since that time. Kaiju Masterclass seemed like the perfect venue to air a lot of the stories and anecdotes that I was able to include in the commentary track. So this basically is like a digest version of the commentary track, which I did for the DVD release. So just to start out talking about the origin of the film, Godzilla vs. Biollante went on a 5-year odyssey from its conception until it hit the silver screen. If you go back to 1984, the 1984 film was moderately successful, not very much, but in doing their audience research, Toho had come to the conclusion that they needed to go in a new direction and start attracting a new generation of Godzilla fans. So Tomoyuki Tanaka, the producer, came up with the idea of running a Godzilla story contest to reach out to this new generation. And in June '85, he put the contest online, and it garnered 5,025 entries, of which there were 4 finalists and 3 alternates. Titles were Godzilla vs. Biollante, The Invisible Devil, Godzilla 2, The Grave from 80 million years ago, Godzilla vs. the Giant Robot Force, The Blood of Godzilla, and New Godzilla 24. Next slide. Okay. Godzilla vs. Biollante from the start became the front runner, and one of the main reasons was this was a versus story, which in the estimation of producer Tomiyama was a must, and it had the additional benefit of using biotechnology as one of the themes. Next slide. The writer of Godzilla vs. Biollante, the story treatment, was a dentist by the name of Shinichiro Kobayashi, and he wasn't exactly a newcomer to the world of special effects. He had written an episode of Return of Ultraman that featured the monster Leogon, and actually the story elements were very similar to what wound up in his story for Godzilla vs. Biollante. Next slide. This is Mr. Kobayashi. Next slide. Some of the features of his stories. He had a monster called Dutalios, which was a hybrid of a fish and a rat, which mutated, escaped from our mad scientist's lab, and did battle with Godzilla in Yokohama. This, of course, was a little bit too expensive for our friends at Toho, so they had this taken out of the story on the second version. Next slide. Eventually, the plant creature that is a combination of plant cells and the spirit of and the cells from his deceased daughter escapes, does battle with Godzilla in a manner somewhat similar to what we have in the final film. Okay, now to next slide. To bring this story to the screen, Toho turned to Kazuki Omori, who you'll see on the left side of this picture. He was originally a medical doctor. And by the way, he will be one of our special guests on Kaiju Masterclass, so please do tune into his presentation later on, I believe this evening. You can find out more about Biollante from him. But he attended medical college, but he had such a love of filmmaking that he really didn't want to become a doctor. He felt his calling was to make films, and he had gotten a lot of notoriety for a film that he had made while he was in school. So he fit the profile of what Tanaka was looking for, which was, first of all, an outsider from Toho, somebody who was able to do something completely different. And he wanted to, he was a good choice for advancing the generational change that they were trying to make at Toho. Basically to, appeal to have somebody with a sensibility of the younger audience and add a little bit more action. Now, Omori wasn't exactly the ideal choice, or not, I shouldn't say ideal choice, but the kind of choice you would expect, because he wasn't really a Godzilla fan himself, nor was he particularly interested in science fiction. He was much more interested in Western films. But his intention in accepting the Godzilla job was to make Godzilla a very powerful and impressive force and derive drama from how man would try to deal with such an overwhelming force. Initially, they had intended to release this film in December of 1986, 2 years after the 84 film. And before that, Omori had accepted a couple of jobs with Toho making idle films so he could get familiar with the system of making films in the Toho company. But as time was going on, the project kept getting delayed, and Omori was making more of these idle films, which were very successful. And Toho's thinking at that time was, well, why should we risk a lot of money on Godzilla? Instead, we can get what we're looking for from Mr. Omori with these idle films. Next slide. Okay, but finally, in the fall of 1988, producer Tomiyama submitted the formal production plan for Godzilla vs. Biollante. This was the cover of the production plan folder that was submitted to Toho Brass. And they were looking for this originally to be produced in 1989. And you can see it has Godzilla with Biollante taking the form of more like a pitcher plant with a large head that was somewhat reminiscent of the Queen Alien. Again, the project got pushed back when they decided to, put out Gunhead in 1988, but finally they had had a hole in their schedule for the end of 1989, and suddenly in May of 1989, the entire project was green-lighted. And this is really unprecedented in the production of these particular science fiction films. For them to start production in May, announce the production in May, and get a film into the theater in December is just an insane schedule. It's really short. And it's amazing to me that they were able even to get a finished film done in that time. Of course, they've had 3 years up to this point to revise the script so that they had a pretty good idea of how the story should be tracking. And of course, Godzilla as a design was pretty well established, but Biollante, as of the time they announced production, still they really had not settled on what the forms of Biollante would look like. So the first couple months were a massive scramble to try and get the designs finished for both versions of Biollante. Now, the script itself that had been developed over time, the key point for this script was the biotechnology aspect. It was something that was topical and made the film relevant. Godzilla as a story still was keeping the anti-nuclear theme, but by adding biotechnology and mixing that theme together, they were getting something that was much more timely. And back in the late 80s, biotechnology was just starting to emerge as a science, and you're just a few years off from major scientific events such as the cloning of Dolly the sheep. The biotechnology aspect also lent itself to a very critical element of the story itself, which was the development of anti-nuclear bacteria, which was the key weapon used against Godzilla in this film. And I think it was one of the best ideas that they had in a long time, to use Godzilla's biology as a way to attack him, since there was no other weapon that ever seemed to have an effect on him. And in the course of developing this story point, they also came up with the rationalization as to why Godzilla has always been so invulnerable, because of the G cell, which is activated by nuclear radiation. So it was really quite a clever way to, set the stage for this particular story. Unfortunately, the one element of the script that didn't really work was the spy aspect that Omori, was so anxious to add in. Being a big James Bond fan himself, it's kind of disappointing to see the way he developed the spy aspect, because it really just didn't have the same kind of appeal that you would expect from somebody who was such a big Bond fan. The story does continue from the 1984 film, so now we're having this is the beginning of continuity in the Godzilla universe, where we have this film picking up directly after the conclusion of 1984 and starting a story arc that would continue for the next 5 films. Okay, no, I'm going to skip that part. Oh my. Okay, let's advance the slideshow. Yes. Okay. So enter Koichi Kawakita. Up to now, special effects had been handled at Toho by Teruyushi Nakano, who was, a direct assistant of Eiji Tsuburaya. Kawakita had entered Toho back in 1962 and had been working in various departments there. And this was his big goal in his career, was to be able to direct Godzilla. He was a huge fan, and he had gotten some directing experience working on TV shows such as Ultraman, Return of Ultraman, Zone Fighter, and Ultraman 80. And the previous year, he had done some extremely impressive work as an effects director for the science fiction film Sayonara Jupiter. So Kawakita, being that Toho was looking for a completely new generation of filmmakers, he was, this was his opportunity to step to the fore and take his job on. And I'd like to read this quote from Kawakita about how he got the job. And he says that, "I have no memory of someone actually telling me, 'Hey, Kawakita, you can be the special effects director.' I was preparing Biollante for many years, and I had heard rumors here and there. And I had an idea I would do it when I first met Omori, but there was no actual moment when someone told me that I was going to be the director. Nakano never told me or gave me advice, and I just attended meetings from the earliest time. And when I noticed, I looked up and it's like, oh, hey, I'm the special effects director. He said, I feel like I kind of missed out. I inherited this position, passed on from Tsuburaya to Arikawa to Nakano, and I should have felt more enthusiasm, but I didn't think about it because I had no time to stop and think about it." And that comment really sums this whole production up very well, because it was like a major event, but because of the super rushed nature of the production, he didn't have any time to even celebrate. He was thrown into the middle of things and had to start working things out. Next slide. Okay. Kawakita, the thing that I think he was such a great choice because he was full of ideas for new things to try in these films. And this film is just loaded with innovation in filming technique. Next slide. One of the things he excelled at doing was using point of view filming. Now here you see a slide where you have the cameraman Eguchi on this sled rushing towards Godzilla across the surface of the big pool. This is supposed to be a point of view of Super X2 flying towards Godzilla. This in particular is a famous scene because shortly after this photo was taken, the boat crashed and Eguchi and the $20,000 camera fell into the big pool, and the film and the camera were ruined. But there's any number of scenes in the film that use point of view filming. You have the helicopters attacking Godzilla at the conclusion. You have again other scenes of Super X2 in Uraga Strait, and you even have different views of Godzilla as seen through the windows of various offices in the Twin 21 business park, the Osaka Business Park, in the center of the film. Next. We also had some very interesting, Kawakita used a lot of interesting camera angles, such as this aerial shot of the business park. When you see this particular set in its entirety, you realize it's really quite small, but by using, really clever camera angles and, good editing, it really looks quite enormous. Next slide. He also liked to use a human perspective to emphasize the size and power of these creatures, especially Godzilla, such as this scene again from the Osaka attack. Next slide. Also, forced perspective. That was another technique that Kawakita used in many scenes, including, especially here in the Thunder Beam field. To quote Kawakita, what he was interested in doing was creating something that looked good on film. He said, it's not important that things look realistic, only that they film realistically. And I think this particular still illustrates that. When you look at it, it looks particularly small, but the way it's framed and shot from the various angles in the film, it really looks much, much bigger than it actually is when you see it in person. Next slide. Yeah, there's a camera angle from behind Godzilla to kind of, again, emphasizes the forced perspective. And next slide. Here's the Osaka Business Park set, and it's really quite a small set when you see it in person, but the perspective, like building, like oversizing the bridge in the foreground, really give that forced perspective so that when you see the shot in the final film, next slide, it all looks, incredibly realistic and very deep. It's really quite an achievement in creating the illusion of depth and size. Next slide. One of the things that Kawakita also brought to the table was, rather than trying to use the traditional technique of helicopters suspended by strings, he got remote control helicopter model enthusiasts to help out in the filming. And so you have helicopters that actually fly across the set and do things in natural flight rather than the helicopters bouncing around on strings and very limited in what they can do. That really helped, again, to sell the effect of real helicopters attacking Godzilla. Next. And finally, the final innovation that Kawakita brought was in terms of computer graphics. Now, of course, you'll see the computer graphics. Realize this is 1989 when computer graphics was in its infancy. Next slide. And although these are rather, crude effects, and they're just used in computer simulations as seen in the film, still they're quite effective, and especially this one I like, which is used as a transition from the military watching Godzilla, monitoring Godzilla's progress, which zooms in and then it dissolves into a scene of Godzilla actually attacking the Thunderbeam field. Okay, now we're going to move on, next slide, to the making of Biollante, the creature itself. We had two versions, the Ashinoko and the Wakasa version. Ashinoko appears in Lake Ashi, as you see here in this great composite shot. Now, suit maker Fuyuki Shinada, who is also another one of our fine guests in Kaiju Masterclass, and who I would strongly urge you to tune in that particular interview, because he has a lot of good stories to tell about making Biollante. His challenge, next slide, in making this version of Biollante was that it's basically just it's just a rose. It's just a plant creature. It's not really a monster. It can't really move around and do anything. As Shinada said, what can you really do with it? It just sits there. So, about the most action they could get out of this thing was to have the vines that grow off of Biollante do all the physical attacks. Next slide. So, this is a picture taken at the end of August. So you can see at the end of August, this is a mere 3 months before production. The first version of Biollante wasn't even finished. This didn't even get to the set until the middle of September. Next slide. And there was quite a lot of controversy. Basically, this was the first time Shinada had ever worked on a feature film, and he wound up learning the hard way that the staff really expects you to do more than what they just order you to do. He made the vines for Biollante in in 3 meter size, and when he got there and delivered everything to the set, they said, okay, and now where's the 6 meter size vines? They just assumed that he was going to do something more than what they had asked him to do, and that was part of the learning process for him on this film. Next. Now we get to the Wakasa version of Biollante, which is just an enormous suit. And this indeed is a suit, because even though it doesn't look like it, there is an actor inside. He's basically sitting on a platform, and about all he can do is use this big lever to try and move the crocodile-like head of Biollante around. This creature did not reach the set until, as you can see, according to the picture there, that's October 26th. This is basically about a little more than a week before the end of filming, and when they had to start pre-production or post-production. So, Shinada basically and his staff worked more than 12 hours a day for about a month straight to make this thing. And they delivered it to the set on a forklift just a week before filming was supposed to finish. So as a result, the staff really couldn't even plan what they were going to do until they saw this thing, because nobody really understood what the final form of Biollante was going to be like. So as a result, I think the entire ending battle comes off as a little bit less than what it could have been, just because they didn't have time to figure out the capabilities of the suit and plan around what it could do and what it could not do. After filming, next. Yeah, after filming this, this suit stayed at the studio for about 2 years, and it became home to all the many homeless or feral cats that live on the studio grounds. And Shinada told me the story a few years back about how on the last day that the suit is all falling apart and getting moldy, and it's really in bad shape. So they took their suit away on a truck, and he said there's a bunch of cats lined up and watching the thing driving away on the truck and saying, "Where are you taking my home?" It must have been quite a sight. Okay, next. Godzilla, on the other hand, was basically a settled design, but Kawakita again made any number of changes to the suit to make it a little bit bigger and more powerful and more along what he was looking to create. Now, this suit that you see here, this is a suit that is actually called the NG suit. It's one they didn't use, but it does incorporate a number of the changes that Kawakita was looking for, which was to basically add a lot more bulk to the lower body and a little, more muscle in the chest and have a little bit more rounded face, smaller and more triangular head. The basic forms of the suit were taken from the molds of the 1984 suit, but this suit, unlike 84, was built around the body of Ken Satsuma, the actor who was going to be playing Godzilla. Next. Now, again, by Biollante's nature, in both forms, basically Biollante is a stationary creature. It can't really do anything. The only thing it could do is attack Godzilla with vines. So it's really up to Satsuma as the suit actor of Godzilla to create the action by tussling with inanimate objects. And this, actually came to be one of the things that he complained about, that many of his opponents were basically things that he had to create the action against. Next. This, however, I think is the #1 improvement and the top achievement that Kawakita made with realizing Godzilla. In this film, they made a Muppet, basically, for lack of a better word, a Muppet Godzilla. A robotized Godzilla that would do performance of basically of the head and mouth. And they originally were thinking to do like they did in 84, which was to make this gigantic, oversized Cybot Godzilla. They wanted to make a new version of that. But that thing, in 84, that thing never succeeded because it was very jerky in its movement, and it didn't really look like the suit that it was trying to duplicate. On the other hand, this puppet Godzilla perfectly matches the look of the suit, and as a result, when it moves the right way, it brings life to Godzilla unlike any other film of the series before. Next. It was made with 24 wires, and there was a bike handle attached to the bottom that would allow them to rotate the suit around. And what you got was Godzilla basically coming to life unlike any time before. He could swivel his head, roar, the tongue would move as he'd roar. He really was completely alive, and I think this is one of the #1 improvements that Kawakita was able to make to bringing Godzilla to life fully on screen. Okay, so this brings us up to where we left off last year. So now we're going to proceed with the second half of the presentation. So next slide. So what I wanted to do at this point was pass on some anecdotes about special effects filming that happened during the course of the production. In this particular scene, here Godzilla shoots his atomic breath at Biollante. First, he blasts the vines in the foreground, and then his ray goes all the way forward to Biollante and hits the body of the rose creature. And if you remember the scene in the film, there's a huge cloud of smoke that comes up, which is basically liquid nitrogen. Okay. Now, when Shinoda made Biollante to attach all the rose petals to the bud, they used a kind of cellophane tape at the base to do that. Now, when the explosion went off and the cold liquid nitrogen started, rising up into the air and engulfing the entire body of the suit, what it did was, unbeknownst to everybody, it froze the cellophane tape, and in doing so, the cellophane tape lost all its tackiness, and the rose petals just started falling one by one from the bud. And this is what you call your basic happy accident, because nobody intended that to happen. But not only did it happen, it looked great, and it was exactly what you would expect for if Godzilla's ray did a lot of damage to Biollante. You would expect that this is exactly what would be happening. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Now, for both Kawakita and Omori, this was their first time working on, a major film project like this. When Kawakita was working on Samurai of the Big Sky and Sayonara Jupiter, there really was no need for him to have a lot of strong interaction with the live action drama. But in this film, they did have to have a lot of coordination and cooperation between the groups, but they really were not in good communication with each other. This particular still is from a night scene where an army boat is supposed to go out to try and investigate Biollante. And when it goes out to investigate Biollante, it's attacked by a vine, which, basically, destroys the boat. And so Kawakita was shooting the effects part of that. The drama team under Omori was supposed to shoot the live action part. But when they shot that, when the live action crew shot that, they didn't shoot it as a night scene. They shot it as a day scene. And not only did they shoot it as a day scene, next slide. Yeah. They decided to, when they found out that Kawakita had shot it, his part as a night scene, they decided to shoot the attack of the vine on their own. So they got one of the vines from the special effects set, and the live action crew filmed it. And this is a scene, they actually wound up using this footage, not as part of the boat attack because that scene was cut. But when Biollante's vine destroys the dock while Shiragami and Miki and Asuka are there, the dock gets destroyed, and then you get this isolated shot of this dopey looking vine just kind of wiggling around, not looking very good, and opening its mouth. And that was done by the the live action the live action drama crew rather than the special effects crew. That was something that in the end, effects crew was very, very unhappy to find out that their work was supplanted by something that the live action team decided to take upon themselves to do. Next. Talking about a little bit about post-production. The film finished shooting in the first couple of days of November. And so now you have the film's release date is basically a month away. One of the first things that they did in mid-November was to get a musical score recorded. As happened with 84, again, Tanaka and Toho people went to Mr. Ifukube and begged him to join the production and provide the score for this film. But as he did in 1984, Ifukube refused. Basically, he considered himself as having been retired from film scoring. He felt he was too old for it. He thought it's time for some new blood. So he suggested, please, find another score for the film. So at that time, there was a video game series called Dragon Quest, which was extremely popular, and a film composer by the name of Koichi Sugiyama, who, by the way, did music for the 2021 Olympics in Japan. He was asked to provide music for this film, and the Toho felt that since he had done the music for the King of the Dragons in the Dragon Quest series, that he would be appropriate for this job. Unfortunately, Sugiyama didn't really score the film in the manner that in a traditional manner. He did not watch any footage before writing his score. In fact, he just really wrote musical sketches, and he turned the orchestration over to an individual by the name of David Howell, who then orchestrated the film and recorded the score. As a result, what you find with this score is that you get a lot of things that just do not match the imagery that's on the screen. Yeah, and even although some of the music on its own might be fine, the purpose of the score is to complement the film, and that was its major failing, is that the score really doesn't match most of the scenery that it's set to. For example, you have the Super X2 theme, which is very westernized sounding, and it's really kind of light and almost a little too cheery and airy to be used for battle music of the military against Godzilla. I mean, if you listen to it on its own, it sounds fine, but it really doesn't work with the scene that it's paired with. The music often is clashing with the scene imagery, and one of I think the biggest failures of the score is a cut called Bio Wars, and this is what's played when the military and the bio major agent and the other agents from the trying to steal the G cells from the Shinjuku ruins. That is basically a rock version of Ifukubei's Godzilla theme, and Ifukube had commented that when they told him, asked him to score the film, he said, no, sorry, I'd rather not do it. But he also said, if you want to use my themes, please go ahead and use them. But the only thing I ask is that you don't make it into rock music. And unfortunately, that's exactly what Sugiyama did. Basically, one of the other criticisms I'll have of the score is it just doesn't have a heaviness, especially where it's needed in Godzilla's theme. I told the story last year about when I saw a digest version of this film on Japanese TV. They ran a 15-minute digest version of this film, basically going up through the Osaka Business Park scene. They ran that on TV the night before, and they didn't have the Sugiyama score with it. They scored the entire digest version with Ifukube themes, and it just was absolutely amazing. It really just kind of like put the hair on end, and I just thought, man, this is just like the perfect mesh of music and screen images. So when I finally saw the finished film about maybe 4 or 5 months later, and I think it was in April of 1990, I was just flabbergasted. Like, what happened? They didn't use the Ifukube themes that I saw in the digest version, and instead they had either no scoring or Sugiyama's mismatched score. So I know a lot of people do tend to like this score. I can't say that I would agree, but while it does have a few nice themes, such I do like the Biollante theme with the humpback whale sounds that have been added to it for Biollante's cry. I really think that it's a major shortcoming of the film. Now, in post-production, Kawakita was editing until the very last day of production. Before they struck the prints, he was editing up until the very last moment. I mean, even if the rushes were bad, the company was pressuring Kawakita to use them, but he absolutely would not allow that to happen. So he basically worked almost 24/7 for the last few days of production in order to get things out. I don't think it was a situation such as Star Trek: The Motion Picture, where they had prints fresh off the printer and onto the plane in order to get them into the theater on time. But certainly it was up until the last minute. And he even wound up editing some original films, which without the company's permission, which is really unheard of. But in order to get this thing done in time, that's what he wound up doing. Next. Let's see. I think I missed. Nope. Okay. One more. Okay. Having watched, I've watched a rough cut of the film before there was any sound effects or animated rays added. There was no sound mix. It was a very preliminary version, and it was probably ran about 15 minutes longer than the final version. Most of the extra footage was special effects. But between that and having read the some of the early versions of the screenplay, there's any number of things that could have been in the film, either were filmed and subsequently dropped, or that they just passed up on. And I thought maybe you'd find interesting some of those concepts that we didn't wind up getting to see in the finished film. In the original script, Biollante's escape from the lab is significantly different from what we have in film. On film, I thought it really didn't quite work, that basically the plant somehow just escaped the lab by itself. The original idea, which from a spy story viewpoint I think would have been much better also, was Biomajor stealing the plant that Shiragami had cloned the G cells into, and when they threatened to burn it, they tell the doctor, just better leave us alone, and they hold up a cigarette lighter to it, and start to burn it a little bit to threaten him to make him back off. And that burning activity is kind of what starts the plant reacting to the flames and starting to mutate. And so when they take the plant into their car and they throw it in the back seat and drive off, the plant starts to grow and mutate. And eventually that's what, the plant exploding out of the back of the back seat, it causes the car to flip over and fall down the mountainside into Ashinoko. So it makes much better sense that that's how Biollante got to be in Ashinoko, rather than somehow this overgrown plant just decided to rush off and go across the countryside on its own until it went into the lake. Let's see. Okay. Also, if you've seen the Laserdisc version that came out of Biollante a few years back, they had a bunch of storyboards for scenes that they had planned to do but didn't wind up shooting. One of them was during the course of Biollante and Godzilla fighting at Ashinoko. Biollante uses one of its vines to stab Godzilla in the shoulder. And when he does that, they're fighting quite near the shore. And so Godzilla's blood comes flying out of his shoulder, and it kind of rains down on all the onlookers that are on the shore watching the battle, and causing, gruesome deaths for all the people who got, covered with Godzilla's radioactive blood. This kind of explicit death scenes really have never been part of Japanese films, and it's not surprising to me that they took it out. But Kawakita and his group were really trying to push the envelope by including scenes such as this in the film. Next. Okay. In the original script, or the early version script, Gondo is the only one who's trying to shoot the anti-nuclear bacteria into Godzilla. And he's doing it actually from ground level. And when he shoots the anti-nuclear bacteria missiles at Godzilla, basically Godzilla notices them and he swats them away, so that that's where they're initially unsuccessful. I think the way they handle this in the final film, by having a multi location attack and having Gondo actually deliver the the major blow to Godzilla through the 21st floor of the Twin 21. I think it works much better on as the way they filmed it. And I wish I could show you the footage. There's a fantastic shot in the rough cut of the film when Super X starts shooting missiles at Godzilla. The very last flurry of missiles he shoots at Godzilla before Godzilla destroys Super X2. There was a really excellent long shot of the Godzilla and Super X facing off in the business park, and the Super X starts moving towards Godzilla. Missiles fly from Super X2, hit Godzilla, and explode right on time. It's like a masterpiece of timing. It had to be difficult as hell to do that, and it just looked fantastic. But unfortunately, they cut the thing from the film, and I believe it's because from a story viewpoint, this scene takes place after the Super X is supposed to have already run out of missiles when it was circling Godzilla, behind the buildings. So unfortunately, that one wound up on the cutting room floor. But it really was quite an amazing scene to see, and I really hope that someday that kind of thing will get released on some kind of special edition video. Next. Okay, now this is something that any of you who've seen the DVD knows that this is one of the extras. After the Ashinoko battle and Biollante is defeated, Biollante basically dissolves into spores, and the spores originally, as they filmed it, were supposed to settle on the countryside here in Ashinoko, on the mountainous countryside, and in doing so, it gave bloom to thousands and thousands of roses. Next. Okay, that's better now. And unfortunately, the way it was filmed, the roses just look gigantic, and they just don't look right. They're all made out of tissue paper, and unfortunately, when you see the footage on film, it's pretty much what they look like. So although I thought it was a nice idea, nice atmospheric scene, the fact that they cut this from the film is not at all surprising. Next. Now this is a scene I really don't understand why they would have cut. There's several shots when Godzilla is first approaching Biollante in Ashinoko. Godzilla is approaching through the forest, and you see this profile shot of Godzilla, walking behind the trees, which is really nice. And then there's another scene which it's not in the unused special effects footage that is on the DVD, but in the work print, you have basically Godzilla's viewpoint walking towards the lake, and you're seeing that as he's moving forward, the trees are starting to part, and you see Biollante in the long, faraway distance. And then, after that, I also have this video footage of them shooting that scene, and actually, all these trees are just basically potted plants. So when Godzilla's, advancing towards the lake in that point of view shot, you actually have these staff guys walking in front of Satsuma, and they're like pushing over these potted plants in front of him to simulate the fact that Godzilla is knocking these trees down in front of him. Next. Okay, for the ending battle, again, Kawakita had some interesting ideas, and one of them was to have the vines attacking Godzilla and use stop motion to make that, to realize those scenes. Basically, with wire works, there's only so much they could do, and it's very difficult to control the vines. Stop motion, you have the ability to control completely how it looks. And Kawakita was really sure that this was going to be an effective way to realize the battle between Godzilla and the vines. But even he had to admit once they showed the Rush films that as much as he liked it, it just not only was the animation not particularly smooth, it also just absolutely didn't cut together with any of the other live action footage. So reluctantly, he dropped this. Next. Likewise, for the ending of the film, what they wanted to do was have Biollante basically consume, in a manner of speaking, consume Godzilla's body. His mouth would open wide, and Biollante would pretty much absorb Godzilla. And the only way to do that was going to be through animation. And unfortunately, by using traditional cell animation, which this is an excerpt scene of, it really, this is another case where Kawakita's ambition exceeded his ability. And, he had to admit that as much as he liked the concept of what they were trying to do here, it just wasn't going to work. It was too jarring of a change from the live action. So again, this idea was dropped at the last moment during the editing process. Okay, next. Okay, so what are the, just thought I'd take a few minutes to talk about a few scenes that I really like, that I think work really well, and some which don't particularly work really well. One that I really like is this particular scene where you foreshadow the return of Godzilla by having Miki Saigusa go to the Psychic Institute and asks the kids to, she's been told that there's been a disturbing development, and she asks the kids to show what they've been, what kind of visions they've all been having, and they all hold up these pictures, these little, drawings of Godzilla that the kids have done. The scene is always a big crowd pleaser when you see it in a theater, and it really is a terrific way to foreshadow the return of Godzilla. That because at this point Godzilla hasn't yet emerged from Mount Mihara. In watching, there was a TV special again the night before the film opened, and it was basically, they had a half-hour program called The Making of Biollante, and in that you see the typical crowd scenes where you have the directors, saying, "Okay, please, everybody, let's run this way because there's a giant monster coming. Please don't smile, don't laugh, because it's going to ruin the film." But of course, every time you see that, then when you see it on film, inevitably there's always the people who are smiling or laughing because they just can't take it seriously. It's a shame that that's the kind of thing that happens, but you go back even to the days of Honda. That was something that almost every film of this genre the directors have had to fight against in almost every film. I really like the mankind versus monster elements of this film, where you have mankind's plans are actually more realistic, and they're not just cannon fodder attacks, when they're battling against Godzilla. Next. The Super X2, it's an unmanned vehicle, which I think that was ultimately a mistake for them to do that, because it kind of reduces the drama of the battle with the Super X. Without the crew's lives at stake, it's almost has kind of like a video game sensibility to the battle. But yet, on the other hand, I do understand why they would do that, because basically, unlike previous films where you're always sure that they're putting human lives at stake by throwing the military up against Godzilla to no avail, here, why would you want to risk human lives in a situation where you don't have to? So that kind of thing is probably a little bit more realistic as far as the script writing thing goes. It's terribly disappointing to see how Omori handles the action scenes, especially when it comes to the fighting between Triple S9 and gosh, I'm blanking out on the hero's name, Kirishima. It's really kind of lame staging, and when you see him about to raises his rifle and about to blow our hero away, and then he gets zapped by the thunder beam. I mean, he really doesn't really have even any panache or any style about what's going on. He just kind of picks it up. He could have been waiting for a bus with that rifle, the way for all the action that he's putting into the scene. So it's really disappointing to see how flat the spy aspects of this script work out. And again, getting back to that Saladian agent, again, the other thing that is very disappointing, that at least those of us in the West will notice, is that the English speaking part of the actors is really awful. And especially Dr. Shirogami's English, when he's talking at the beginning of the film, it's almost the kind of thing that you have to play back 3 or 4 times to really figure out what it is that he's saying. It's so poorly done, and I really don't understand why. It'd be very simple to just get a native English speaker to go ahead and review the footage and offer them some advice on overdubbing. Okay, next. The rainstorm at the conclusion of the film, I think, really adds a lot of atmosphere to the film, and this was Kawakita's idea, because that's exactly what he was looking for. I know that not only the staff, but the production crew, the office people, nobody wanted him to do that because of the difficulties in trying to do rain on the set. Basically, you're using soil on the set to create the landscape, and the more rain you use, the more it washes away, and it gets all over everything, and it makes it really difficult to keep the filming equipment in good shape. Let's see. Okay, next. And this is probably what I consider as the worst idea that Omori put into the script. When Biollante is finally defeated and changes into spores, okay, the spores are rising up into the air and leaving the Earth's atmosphere. But to have Erica's angelic face floating up into the air, it really just plain looks silly, and it changes the atmosphere abruptly from a serious battle into this strange fantasy. And I really think that was very ill-conceived. There were many ways they could have worked around that than to do it just so obvious in this manner. And likewise, the final scene where you have Shirogami giving his speech, which basically is a summary of the theme of this movie, where he has his change of heart, and oh yeah, this is a terrible thing what we've done with biotechnology. It really, its delivery seems insincere, and it seems all much too convenient and contrived. Okay, next. So finally, anyway, film finished production, and it got released in early December of 1989. It did okay at the box office, although it did fall short of its 1.5 billion yen goal for the box office. But I think that that's attributed to any number of factors. First of all, I don't understand why, but I think, waiting 5 years, making a 5-year gap from 1984 until the time this film was released was a mistake. Any momentum you had built up in 84 by the release of that film was wasted by the time that this film came around. Likewise, the last minute filming, they had to cut corners, and they really didn't have time to finish the job. There was minimal publicity and merchandising and very little awareness for this film because everything was put together at the last minute. Trailers only showed up a couple weeks in advance of the film, and no pictures of Biollante were even available until December. There was a Godzilla 35th birthday party that they held at that time, but it was mostly ignored by the media. And Next. One publicity stunt they did have is they had this gigantic Godzilla balloon, 15 meters tall, that was displayed in Hibiya back at the end of November. But even that almost turned out to be it turned out to be more publicity than they wanted, because at one point this thing collapsed and collapsed on top of a couple of onlookers, and they had to be rescued, very nearly facing death, getting smothered by a Godzilla balloon. So at the time, next. At the time this, that I was recording my commentary, there was no U.S. release, and this film was largely invisible in the United States. So I was really pleased that it was getting this release. And even though it never came out with a commentary track, I'm still happy that finally Godzilla vs. Biollante got its due in this country and has gotten a lot of viewing. And I think even though the film faced pretty tepid response among critics, I think that this film is kind of like one of the odd men out of the series, because it has so much going for it, so much unique creativity and energy, yet at the same time it has any number of huge flaws in the acting and in the music. Direction sometimes wasn't up to the subject matter, but it does remain on total, it does remain one of my favorites because of the amount of sheer energy and innovation that we see in this film. So anyway, that is my presentation, and I thank all of you for hanging with me and staying on course, and hopefully you've enjoyed learning more about Godzilla vs. Biollante. And if I may, I'm going to look at some of the comments here to see if there are any questions I might be able to answer or comment on. Let's see. Film licenses in limbo. Okay. Yeah, if you have any questions, please just type them in. I think, Biollante, not being one of the more popular enemy monsters, I think it's the kind of thing that, especially now in the CG age, much like Hydra, I think Hydra is in the same class. These are creatures that, if they ever decide to go back into production and make any kind of versus type films, that these are the creatures that would benefit the most from computer graphics. Okay, I have a question here. Is there some concept art of some mutated looking people? Was that related to? Yeah. Okay. The mutated looking people that you're talking about, that is part of the storyboards where you see this is the effect of Godzilla's blood pouring down on the fleeing populace, that it did start creating all sorts of deformations in people. Let me see if I look back up and I can find any other questions. Yeah. Okay. No. Okay, well, not at least that I can see. If there aren't any more questions, again, I would like to thank you so much for attending this session of Kaiju Masterclass. Oh, the TV host. Yes, I did not get a chance to talk about him. The weird TV host, that guy is named Demon Kogure. He is a rock musician who is also, he got a place in Godzilla vs. Biollante because he is a huge Godzilla fan, and so he asked for a chance to appear in the film, and they wrote that part into the script just for him. Anything about the Godzilla? Okay. One last question here. Do you know anything about the Godzilla concept that became Gunhead? Well, yeah, the Godzilla concept that became Gunhead was the one story pitch, which was Godzilla versus the Robot Army, which is basically going to be a bunch of mechanized defense things that would try to clash against Godzilla. I've seen a few storyboards from that particular thing, and it basically had a lot of mobile suits and different kinds of mechanisms that would go up against Godzilla in the final battle. I believe that is what was adapted into Gunhead. Okay, well, that's it then. Again, thank you very much for joining this session of Kaiju Masterclass. Please continue to tune in to our other sessions, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your next day and a half with Kaiju Masterclass. Thank you very much.